Today we're going to start the assembly of the Z180 retro computer from Small Computer Central, specifically the sc131, a pocket-sized Z180 CPM system, which comes with its own case. As with all of the projects from this company, it is remarkably well documented, with both a colour manifest of the parts, allowing easy identification, and an assembly guide on their website, details in the description below. The assembly guide does state that the assembly of this project is not intended for those who have never worked on electronic projects before, as it does assume that users are familiar with assembling circuit boards, soldering, and cleaning. As with previous projects, you'll need a soldering iron, wire clippers, and ideally a multimeter that can measure resistance to allow you to test for shorts during the build process. The assembly guide has details of the assembly order, amendments needed to the supplied case, and forming up the headers and LED guides. Once you have checked the manifest to ensure all the parts are there, you can start to solder in the lowest profile components, starting with the resistors. There are 3 sets of resistors, and if you are unsure about the colour coding on each resistor, it's helpful to use a multimeter to test the resistance value of each to ensure that you place them in the correct place on the circuit board. The resistors' location and their values are printed on the circuit board, plus the assembly guide also details exactly where they should be added, which removes any doubt. As always, take care when bending the wires of the resistors to match the hole spacing on the circuit board before starting the soldering. Try not to put too many components in at the one time, as it's easier to miss a solder joint when there are a lot of them to do at one go. As always, it's good to inspect your soldering as you go, to ensure you haven't missed a component or inadvertently shorted out a component by applying too much solder. Once the resistors are all in place, we can move on to the IC sockets. There are only 4 of these to fit, but take care to orientate them correctly, which will be an aid when you come to fit the ICs themselves. I usually find that a small elastic band holds the IC socket in place while you solder the corner pins of each socket. Once they are soldered, you can then remove the elastic bands and solder the rest of the pins on each socket easily. Now that the IC sockets are in place, the next task is the socket for the CPU. This socket does have a lot of pins, so take your time soldering this one in place. The assembly guide does suggest that doing some testing for short circuits with a multimeter at various points during assembly. This approach helps eliminate problems at an early stage and saves time debugging the hardware once assembly has been completed. The next task is the placement of the capacitors, of which there are 3 types. One of the capacitors needs to be orientated correctly, as shown in the assembly guide. This is the point where I experience technical difficulties with this recording, making the remainder of the footage of the assembly unusable. This is where the difference between recording a hardware or software video exhibits itself. Software videos are easier to redo, whereas it's considerably harder to undo solder joints and physical assembly. While it's a pity we're missing out on some of the recording of the assembly, we are where we are. And this is the completed box. So I'm going to take this apart so you can see what progress we have made. The case that comes with the kit does need a small bit of adjustment, the removal of one of these plastic parts. This is to allow the micro SD card adapter to fit into the case quite happily. As you can see, the connectors at the back of the board are to allow connection for the 2 serial ports. and additionally so you can put a card into the micro SD slot. At the other side of our board, we have the 3 LEDs, a reset, a power and a status LED, and additionally we have a reset button. So if we take this out of the case and we separate these two end boards, we can see the board itself. Now what was missing from the footage was the fitting of the clock, the final capacitor, and the fitting of each of the integrated circuits. Fitting the ICs in, of course, involves slightly bending the legs so that they fit into the sockets neatly. The slotting in of the processor itself is a little more delicate, and you have to make sure you don't apply too much pressure to one side than the other. A nice even pressure will allow the chip to sit into the socket quite happily. The fitment of the board for the micro SD adapter is a little more challenging. You have to bend the pins that are pre-soldered onto the card so they will sit in vertically into this socket here. There are 2 brass standoffs supplied to allow you to support the other end of the board, so it is quite firmly in place once these have been screwed in. Before I screw the circuit board into the case, the next thing we have to do is to power the unit up and do some testing. However, in true dramatic fashion, I'm going to leave that to the next video. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please feel free to click on the link in the description below to discover more videos.